The woman who arrived in Granite, Montana territory in the late spring of 1876 looked like she had been carved from stone herself, all sharp edges and hollow spaces where softness should have been. Olivia Anders stepped off the supply wagon with nothing but a worn carpet bag and the clothes on her back. Her pale blue dress faded to almost gray from too many washings and too much sun. She was 20 years old, though her eyes held the weariness of someone twice that age. The wagon driver had barely waited for her feet to touch the ground before snapping his reins and moving on, leaving her standing in the dusty main street of a town that seemed to consist of little more than a general store, a saloon, a blacksmith, and a scattering of rough-hewn buildings that looked like they might blow away in a strong wind. She had come to work as a seamstress for Mrs. Patterson, the proprietor of the general store who had advertised for help in a Denver newspaper 3 months prior. Olivia had written immediately, her penmanship careful and precise despite the trembling of her hands. She needed to leave Denver. She needed to disappear into somewhere small and forgettable, where no one would ask questions about her past or wonder why a young woman traveled alone with no family, no references, and no history she was willing to share. The mountain peaks surrounding Granite rose up like sentinels, still crowned with snow despite the warming weather. The air here was different than in Denver, thinner and cleaner, carrying the scent of pine and something wild she could not name. Olivia picked up her bag and walked toward the general store, her boots raising small clouds of dust with each step. Mrs. Patterson turned out to be a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s with graying hair pulled back in a severe bun. She looked Olivia up and down with an expression that revealed nothing. "You are smaller than I expected," she said finally. "Can you actually sew?" "Yes, madam. I have been sewing since I was 6 years old." This was true. It was one of the few skills Olivia had that could earn her honest wages. "The room is upstairs above the store. It is not much, but it is clean and the roof does not leak. You will work 6 days a week, sunup to sundown with Sundays for rest. Meals are your own concern, but I will deduct something from your wages for the room. Is this acceptable?" It was more than acceptable. It was salvation. "Yes, madam, thank you." The room was indeed not much. It contained a narrow bed, a small table with a single chair, a washstand with a chipped basin, and one window that looked out over the mountains. But it was hers. For the first time in her life, Olivia had a space that belonged to her alone, a door she could close, walls that would keep the world out. She sat on the edge of the bed and allowed herself exactly 3 minutes of tears before she unpacked her meager belongings and prepared to start her new life. The work was exactly what Mrs. Patterson had promised: long hours of mending, hemming, and occasionally creating new garments from fabric that arrived on the supply wagons. Olivia worked with steady concentration, her stitches small, and even her fingers quick and sure. She spoke little, kept her eyes down, and tried to make herself as invisible as possible. This had been her strategy for survival for as long as she could remember. She had been in Granite for 3 weeks when she first saw the mountain man. It was early morning, barely past dawn, and Olivia had risen early as was her habit. Sleep often eluded her, and she found it easier to be awake and working than to lie in bed wrestling with memories she wanted to forget. She was standing at her window, looking out at the pink gold light spreading across the mountain peaks, when she noticed him. He was walking down the main street with the easy, ground-eating stride of someone accustomed to covering long distances. Even from a distance, she could see he was massive, well over 6 feet tall with shoulders broad enough to fill a doorway. His hair was dark and longer than was fashionable, hanging past his collar, and he wore buckskin clothing that marked him as someone who spent more time in the wilderness than in town. A rifle was slung across his back, and there was something about the way he moved that spoke of coiled strength and absolute confidence. He stopped directly below her window, and for a moment, she thought he was looking up at her. Her breath caught and she stepped back quickly, her heart racing in the old familiar way that meant danger, meant trouble, meant hide. But when she dared to peek out again, he was walking toward the general store, disappearing from her view. She heard his voice a few minutes later, deep and rumbling, speaking to Mrs. Patterson. She could not make out the words, but there was something pleasant about the sound, lacking the edge of meanness or cruelty that she had learned to listen for in men's voices. That evening, Mrs. Patterson mentioned him as she was reviewing Olivia's work for the day. "That was Nathan Thorne who came in this morning. He lives up in the mountains, comes down once a month or so for supplies. A good man, quiet and honest. He trapped for a while. Now he does some guiding, some hunting. People around here respect him." Olivia nodded but said nothing. Men were to be avoided, respected or not. She had learned that lesson thoroughly. The next morning she woke before dawn as usual and went to her window to watch the sunrise. This had become her ritual, these few quiet moments before the day began, and she had to armor herself for the world. But this morning, something was different. On the windowsill, just outside the glass, was a small bouquet of wildflowers. Olivia stared at them for a long moment, certain she was mistaken, that she was seeing things. But no, they were real. Wild lupine and Indian paintbrush, the purple and red bright against the weathered wood of the sill. Someone had placed them there, and recently, because they were still fresh, dewdrops clinging to the petals. She opened the window carefully and picked them up, half expecting them to vanish like something from a dream. But they were solid in her hand, the stems slightly damp, the flowers giving off a faint, sweet scent. She looked down at the street below, but it was empty, no sign of who might have left them. For a long time, she simply stood there holding the flowers, feeling something strange and painful in her chest. She had never received a gift before, not once in all her 20 years. The people who had raised her in that grim house in Denver had not believed in such frivolities. Gifts were for spoiled children, they had said. She should be grateful for the food she ate and the roof over her head and not expect anything more. She put the flowers in her water glass and set them on the small table where she could see them while she worked. All day, between stitches, she found her eyes drifting to them, still half convinced they would disappear, that she had imagined the whole thing. But the next morning there were more. This time it was columbine and mountain forget-me-nots, delicate and beautiful. Olivia opened her window and looked out at the empty street, her heart beating fast. Who was doing this? And why, on the third morning, she woke even earlier and stationed herself by the window, determined to catch whoever was leaving the flowers. She waited in the darkness, watching as the sky slowly lightened, as the first birds began to sing. And then she saw him. Nathan Thorne emerged from the shadows like a piece of the mountain itself, moving with that same quiet confidence she had noticed before. He was even more imposing up close, all muscle and hard planes, his face partially obscured by the pre-dawn dimness. He paused below her window, and she saw him place something on the sill, his movements surprisingly gentle for such a large man. Then he stepped back and looked up. Their eyes met. Olivia froze, her hand pressed against the glass. She should step back, hide, pretend she had not seen. But something kept her there, held by his gaze. Even in the dim light, she could see his eyes were dark, watching her with an intensity that should have frightened her but somehow did not. He touched the brim of his hat in a gesture of acknowledgement, then turned and walked away, disappearing into the alley beside the general store. Olivia stood at the window for a long time after he was gone, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. Then she opened the window and picked up the flowers he had left. More lupine, mixed with what looked like wild roses, still closed in tight buds. She should throw them away. She should close the window and never acknowledge this strange ritual. She knew better than to encourage any attention from men, no matter how seemingly harmless. But instead, she found herself arranging the flowers carefully with the others, creating a small garden in her stark room. Every morning after that, without fail, there were new flowers. Bluebells and shooting stars, yellow arnica and pink fairy slippers, white mountain avens and purple asters. He must have been walking miles into the high country to find some of them, she realized, because they were alpine flowers that did not grow near the town. Each bouquet was carefully chosen, the stems cut cleanly, the flowers arranged with a care that spoke of thought and intention. Olivia found herself waking earlier and earlier, drawn to the window to watch for him. He always came just before dawn, moving through the quiet town like a ghost. Sometimes he would look up and their eyes would meet through the glass. She never opened the window during these moments, never acknowledged him beyond her presence there. And he never tried to speak to her, never demanded anything, just left his offerings and walked away. It had been going on for 2 weeks when Mrs. Patterson finally mentioned it. "I see you have quite a collection of flowers in your room," she said one evening, her tone neutral but her eyes sharp. Olivia felt her face grow hot. "Someone has been leaving them. I do not know who." The lie felt awkward on her tongue. "It is Nathan Thorne," Mrs. Patterson said matter-of-factly. "I have seen him. Half the town has seen him, truth be told. It is the talk of the place, though most folks have the courtesy not to mention it." Olivia said nothing, her hands still on the fabric she was hemming. "He is a good man," Mrs. Patterson continued. "Honest and hard-working. Lost his parents to fever when he was 16, survived on his own in these mountains ever since. That takes strength and determination. He does not come to town much, keeps to himself mostly. I have never known him to show interest in a woman before." "I do not encourage him," Olivia said quickly. "I have never even spoken to him." "I did not say you did, but you keep the flowers." Yes, she kept the flowers. She could not bring herself to throw them away, even when they began to wilt, and she had to replace them with fresh ones. She pressed some of them between the pages of the one book she owned, a volume of poetry that had belonged to her mother, or so she had been told. It was the only thing she had from before she had been placed in that house in Denver, before her life had become a series of chores and harsh words and endless rules designed to break her spirit. On Sunday, her one day of rest, Olivia allowed herself to walk through the town and a little way into the surrounding countryside. The mountains called to her in a way she did not fully understand, their wild beauty so different from anything she had known. She followed a small stream up into the foothills, careful not to go too far, not to lose sight of the town below. She was sitting on a rock, watching the water tumble over stones worn smooth by time, when she heard a voice behind her. "Those are trout, if you are wondering. Small ones, but good eating." She spun around so fast she nearly fell off the rock. Nathan Thorne stood a few yards away, and in full daylight she could finally see him clearly. He was younger than she had thought, perhaps 25 or 26, with a face that was all strong bones and hard angles. His eyes were deep brown, almost black, and his hair hung loose around his shoulders, catching the sunlight in blue-black gleams. He wore a simple homespun shirt that did nothing to hide the powerful muscles of his chest and arms, and his hands, she noticed, were large and scarred from work, but somehow still gentle-looking. "I did not mean to startle you," he said, his voice that same low rumble she had heard through the floor of her room. I was checking my snares and saw you walk up this way. I wanted to make sure you were all right." Olivia found her voice, though it came out smaller than she intended. "I am fine. I was just walking. It is a good place for walking, peaceful." He made no move to come closer, which she appreciated. "I am Nathan Thorne. I know. I am Olivia Anders. I know." The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. "Thank you for not throwing the flowers away." She felt that strange tightness in her chest again. "Thank you for leaving them. I have never—" She stopped, unsure how to finish. Never what? Never received flowers before, never received any gift before. The words came out in a rush, and immediately she wished she could take them back. He did not need to know that. He did not need to know anything about her, but his expression softened, and something flickered in his dark eyes that might have been pain. "Then I will keep bringing them," he said simply. "Every morning as long as you want them." "Why?" The question escaped before she could stop it. He was quiet for a moment, seeming to consider his answer. "I saw you that first morning standing at your window, and you looked like you were waiting for something, or maybe waiting to be found. And I thought you deserved to have something beautiful, something that was just for you, no strings attached." No strings attached. Olivia studied his face, looking for the lie, the hidden expectation, the thing he would want in return. But she saw only honest openness, a straightforward sincerity that was completely foreign to her experience. "I should get back," she said, standing up from the rock. "Mrs. Patterson expects me to help with inventory tomorrow morning, and I need to prepare." He nodded and stepped aside to let her pass. "Olivia," he said as she started down the path, and she stopped despite herself. "I hope you know you are safe here. In this town, I mean, and especially safe from me. I would never do anything to hurt you or frighten you." She looked back at him, this mountain man with his gentle eyes and his armfuls of wildflowers, and felt something crack open inside her, a tiny fissure in the wall she had built around herself. "I believe you," she said, and was surprised to find it was true. The flowers continued, every single morning without fail. And every Sunday, when Olivia went for her walk along the stream, Nathan would appear as if by accident, keeping a respectful distance but always there. They would talk, or sometimes just exist in companionable silence. And slowly, so slowly she barely noticed it happening, Olivia began to relax around him. He told her about his life in the mountains, about tracking game and reading weather and surviving in a place that killed the unwary. He spoke of his parents with affection, but without excessive grief, as someone who had processed his loss and made peace with it. He asked her questions, but never pushed when she was reluctant to answer, seeming to understand that her past was painful territory she was not yet ready to traverse. By July, the wildflowers had changed with the season, and Nathan's morning offerings included white fairy trumpets and red cliff roses. Olivia's room had become a bower of color and fragrance, and she no longer bothered to hide them or pretend they were not important to her. One Sunday, Nathan brought fishing line and hooks and taught her how to fish in the stream, his large hands patient as he showed her how to bait the hook and cast the line. When she caught her first trout, a silvery flash of life that pulled against her line with surprising strength, she laughed out loud, a sound so unexpected it startled them both. "I do not think I have ever heard you laugh before," Nathan said, grinning. "I do not think I have laughed in years," Olivia admitted, and the truth of it made her momentarily sad. But then the fish tugged again and Nathan was helping her reel it in, his hand covering hers on the line, warm and solid and safe, and the sadness passed. He cleaned the fish with quick, efficient movements and wrapped it in leaves for her to take back to town. "Cook it tonight," he said, "with a little butter if you have it and some wild onions. I will leave some onions with your flowers tomorrow morning." She wanted to invite him to share the meal with her, but her tiny room above the general store was no place to entertain, and it would not have been proper besides. So instead, she just thanked him and walked back to town with her prize, feeling lighter than she had in months. That evening, as she cooked the trout over the small stove in the corner of her room, Mrs. Patterson came upstairs with a plate of fresh bread and a small crock of butter. "I thought you might need these," she said, her tone carefully neutral but her eyes kind. "Thank you," Olivia said, and then, because Mrs. Patterson had been nothing but fair to her, she added, "He is teaching me to fish. He is a good teacher, I imagine, patient." Mrs. Patterson set the bread and butter on the table. "My late husband used to fish that same stream. He said it was the most peaceful place on earth." She paused at the door. "Olivia, I do not presume to give advice where it is not wanted, but I will say this. Not all men are the same. Some are worth the risk of trusting." After she left, Olivia stood at her window eating the trout she had caught, watching the sun set over the mountains, thinking about trust and risk, and whether she had enough courage for either. August came with hot days and cool nights, and the wildflowers in the high meadows were at their peak. Nathan's morning offerings became even more elaborate, sometimes including unusual specimens she could tell he had hiked far to find. Once he left a tiny, alpine forget-me-not with a note that said simply, "Found this at 10,000 feet. Made me think of the color of your eyes." Olivia pressed the note between the pages of her poetry book with trembling fingers. Their Sunday meetings had become the center of her week, the thing she looked forward to and planned for. She had begun to bring things with her on these walks. Bread she had baked in Mrs. Patterson's kitchen, a jar of wild strawberry preserves, once a shirt she had mended for him after noticing it was torn. Small offerings of her own, the only way she knew to show that his attention was not unwelcome. One Sunday in late August, Nathan took her higher up the mountain than they had ever gone before, to a meadow absolutely carpeted with wildflowers. It was like standing in a rainbow, color stretching in every direction, the air thick with the hum of bees and the sweet scent of blooms. "This is where I get most of your morning flowers," he said, gesturing to the abundance around them. "Seemed only fair to show you the source." Olivia turned in a slow circle, overwhelmed by the beauty of it. "I have never seen anything like this," she breathed. "Not many people have. It is a bit of a climb to get here, and most folks are too busy to make the trip." He picked a purple aster and tucked it behind her ear with a gentleness that made her heart stutter. "Suits you." She looked up at him, at this mountain of a man with his scarred hands and his wild hair and his inexhaustible patience with her, and felt something shift inside her, something profound and irreversible. She was falling in love with him. Perhaps had been falling in love with him since that first morning when she had seen him through her window. The realization terrified her. "Nathan," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I need to tell you something, about before I came here." His expression grew serious. "Only if you want to. You do not owe me your history. But I want you to know." She sat down in the flowers and he settled beside her, close but not touching. "I was raised by people who believed that children were burdens to be managed, not blessings to be cherished. They did not hurt me physically," she added quickly, seeing his jaw tighten. "But they made very clear that I was an obligation, not a wanted member of the family. They had taken me in as a baby when my mother died, and they never let me forget what I owed them for their charity." Nathan was silent, but she could feel the tension in him, the controlled anger at people he had never met. "I was never allowed anything that was just mine," she continued. "No toys as a child, no pretty dresses as I grew older. Everything was plain and serviceable, and always reminded me that I should be grateful, that I was lucky to have anything at all." When I turned 18, they made it clear they had fulfilled their obligation, and it was time for me to make my own way. They found me work at a sewing factory in Denver, hard work for little pay, and I lived in a boarding house with 6 other women in a room meant for 2. She plucked a flower absently, turning it between her fingers. There was a man at the factory, a supervisor. He started paying attention to me, bringing me things, saying kind words. I was so starved for any scrap of kindness that I did not see what he really wanted, what he expected in return. Nathan's hand clenched into a fist against his thigh, but he said nothing, letting her continue. When I refused him, he made my life hell. He sabotaged my work, claimed I was stealing, tried to get me fired. And when that did not work, he started telling people that I was loose, that I had been with him and other men, that I was not respectable. None of it was true, but it did not matter. The damage was done. I could not stay in Denver, so when I saw Mrs. Patterson's advertisement, I used what little money I had saved and came here. She finally looked at him, searching his face for judgment or disgust or pity. But all she saw was compassion and a fierce protectiveness that made her breath catch. "That man was a coward and a liar," Nathan said, his voice low and intense. "And the people who raised you were fools, but they do not get to define who you are, Olivia. You are not a burden. You are not someone who should be grateful for scraps. You are strong and brave and beautiful, and you deserve every good thing this world has to offer." Tears spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them. No one had ever spoken to her like that, with such absolute conviction, such certainty of her worth. Nathan reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and when she did not, he gently wiped the tears from her face with his thumb. "I love you," he said simply. "I think I have loved you since that first morning when I saw you at your window, looking like you were made of moonlight and sadness. And if you can find it in yourself to trust me, to maybe love me back, I promise you this. I will spend every day for the rest of my life making sure you know how precious you are." Olivia could not speak past the lump in her throat. So instead, she leaned forward and kissed him, soft and tentative, her first kiss and somehow everything she had not known she was waiting for. He made a sound low in his chest and pulled her closer, his arms coming around her like a fortress, like safety, like home. And surrounded by wildflowers under the Montana sky, Olivia let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she could have something beautiful that was all her own. They sat in that meadow until the sun began to set, talking and kissing and making plans. Nathan wanted to marry her, he said, as soon as she was ready. He had a cabin up in the mountains, nothing fancy but solid and warm, with good hunting nearby and a creek that never ran dry. He could provide for her, make sure she never wanted for anything. But more than that, he wanted to give her the life she deserved, full of laughter and peace and all the flowers she could ever want. "Yes," Olivia said, the word feeling like freedom. "Yes to all of it." They were married 3 weeks later on a September morning that dawned clear and bright. Mrs. Patterson stood as witness, along with the blacksmith and his wife. Olivia wore a new dress she had sewn herself, pale blue with white lace at the collar and cuffs, the prettiest thing she had ever owned. And Nathan wore new clothes too, though he looked slightly uncomfortable in the starched shirt and proper jacket, like a wolf trying to pass for a house dog. But when he saw Olivia walk toward him, his face transformed with such joy and wonder that several of the watching townspeople openly wept. And when the minister asked if he would take this woman as his wife, Nathan's "I will" rang out clear and certain, a vow and a promise and a declaration all at once. The kiss he gave her after they were pronounced married was chaste enough for the watching crowd, but his eyes promised things that made her blush and feel hot all over. Mrs. Patterson had arranged a small celebration at the general store, with cake and cider, and it seemed like the whole town turned out to wish them well. Olivia was overwhelmed by the warmth and acceptance, so different from anything she had experienced before. "You are one of us now, Mrs. Patterson said, embracing her tightly. "And Nathan is good people. You take care of each other, you hear?" "I will," Olivia promised. As the afternoon wore on and the celebration began to wind down, Nathan leaned close and whispered in her ear, "Ready to see your new home, Mrs. Thorne, Mrs. Thorne." Olivia Anders was gone, transformed into someone new, someone loved and wanted. "Yes," she said, "I am ready." They rode up into the mountains on Nathan's horse, Olivia sitting in front of him, his arms around her keeping her safe as they climbed higher and higher. She had packed her few belongings that morning, said goodbye to her little room above the general store with something like fondness. It had been her sanctuary, but it was time to move forward, to step into this new life she had chosen. The cabin was better than Nathan had described. It was not large, just 2 rooms and a loft, but it was beautifully made. The logs chinked tight against the weather, the windows fitted with real glass. Inside, everything was clean and orderly, with a stone fireplace taking up most of one wall and a large bed in the corner piled high with furs. There was a table Nathan had made himself, chairs that matched, and shelves lined with supplies. And everywhere in jars and vases and cups were wildflowers. "Thought you might want them," Nathan said, looking almost shy, "since you will not have your windowsill anymore." Olivia turned to him with tears in her eyes again, but this time they were tears of joy. "It is perfect," she said. "You are perfect." He pulled her into his arms, and for a long moment they just held each other, feeling the rightness of it, the way they fit together like pieces of a puzzle finding their match. Then Nathan tilted her face up and kissed her properly, deeply, with none of the restraint he had shown in town. His hands moved over her back, pulling her closer, and Olivia felt heat bloom through her entire body, a wanting she had never experienced before. "Are you afraid?" he asked against her lips, his voice rough with desire but his eyes still gentle, still giving her room to say no. "No," she said, and realized it was true. For the first time in her life she was not afraid. "Show me, Nathan. Show me what it means to be loved." And he did, with a tenderness and patience that turned her fear into wonder, her uncertainty into joy. He was gentle with her, taking his time despite his obvious hunger, making sure she felt only pleasure. And when they finally came together, skin to skin, heart to heart, Olivia understood what it meant to be truly seen, truly known, and loved anyway. Loved because of who she was, not despite it. Afterward, they lay tangled together under the firs, the fire crackling softly, and Nathan traced lazy patterns on her shoulder with his fingers. "I love you, Olivia Thorne," he murmured. "Every difficult, beautiful, brave part of you." "I love you too," she whispered back. "Thank you for the flowers. Thank you for seeing me." "Always," he promised. "I will always see you." That winter was hard, as Montana winters always were, with snow piling up higher than the cabin windows and temperatures that could kill an unprepared person in minutes. But inside their small home, Olivia had never been warmer. She spent her days sewing and cooking and learning how to manage a mountain household, while Nathan hunted and trapped and kept them supplied with meat and furs to sell. And every morning, without fail, even when the snow was so deep he had to dig his way out of the cabin, Nathan would disappear into the white wilderness and return with something for her. Not always flowers now, because few grew in the winter, but interesting pine cones or branches of evergreen, or once a perfectly preserved bird's nest he had found. Small reminders that he was thinking of her, that she was precious to him. On Christmas morning, he gave her a necklace he had made from small polished stones and leather cord, each stone a different color. "One for each type of flower I brought you that first summer," he explained, fastening it around her neck with fingers that trembled slightly. "So you can carry them with you always." Olivia gave him a new buckskin shirt she had spent weeks making in secret, decorated with beadwork in patterns she had learned from a book Mrs. Patterson had loaned her. And when he put it on, she thought he had never looked more handsome, this mountain man who had somehow found her in her loneliness and loved her back to life. Spring came eventually, as it always did, with a sudden explosion of wildflowers that turned the high meadows into a riot of color. Nathan took Olivia to new places, higher and more remote, showing her the hidden beauty of his mountain home. She grew strong on the walks, her soft town body becoming lean and capable, and she learned to read weather and track animals, and all the thousand small skills needed to survive in the wilderness. One morning in late May, almost exactly a year after she had first arrived in Granite, Olivia woke feeling strange and unsettled. Her stomach was queasy, and certain smells that normally pleased her now made her feel ill. Nathan noticed immediately, his face creasing with concern. "Should I fetch the doctor from town?" he asked, already reaching for his coat. "No," Olivia said slowly, her hand moving to her belly. "I do not think I am sick. I think I am pregnant." The look on Nathan's face was almost comical, shock and joy and fear all fighting for dominance. "Are you certain?" "Not entirely, but all the signs point to it." She took his hand and placed it over her stomach. "We are going to have a baby, Nathan." He pulled her into his arms so suddenly she squeaked in surprise. Then he was kissing her all over her face, laughing and crying at the same time. "A baby," he kept saying. "We are having a baby." The pregnancy was not easy. Olivia was sick for the first few months, able to keep down only the blandest foods, and Nathan hovered over her like an anxious bear, trying to anticipate her every need. But as summer progressed and she began to show, the sickness faded and was replaced by an almost aggressive good health. She felt strong and capable and more beautiful than she ever had before, even with her swelling belly. Nathan could not keep his hands off her, constantly touching her stomach, feeling for kicks, talking to the baby in a low, murmuring voice. He was building a cradle from smooth pine wood, sanding it until it was soft as silk, so there would be no chance of splinters. And every morning he still brought her wildflowers, though now he would press them into her hand and then kneel to place a kiss on her belly, greeting the child they had made together. In October, when the aspens had turned gold and the first snow was dusting the high peaks, Olivia's labor began. Nathan rode for the midwife, an old woman who lived between Granite and the mountains, and she arrived just as the contractions were getting serious. Nathan wanted to stay, refused to be sent away like many husbands were, and the midwife just shrugged and said it was his choice if he wanted to see what women went through. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Nathan held Olivia's hand through all of it, wiping her forehead with cool cloths, murmuring encouragement, his face etched with worry and helplessness. And when the baby finally came, entering the world with an indignant wail, Nathan wept openly. "A boy," the midwife announced, cleaning the baby and wrapping him in soft blankets. "Healthy and strong." She placed the child in Olivia's arms, and Olivia looked down at the tiny red face, the shock of dark hair, the miniature hands that gripped her finger with surprising strength. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "We have been waiting for you." Nathan leaned over them both, his large hand cradling the baby's head, his expression one of absolute wonder. What should we name him? Olivia had been thinking about this for months. "James," she said, "after your father." Nathan's eyes filled with fresh tears. "James Thorne. It is perfect. He is perfect." The midwife stayed for a week, helping Olivia recover and teaching her how to nurse and care for the baby. Nathan was utterly useless in any practical sense, too overwhelmed with emotion to do much besides stare at his son with awe. But once the midwife left, he threw himself into fatherhood with the same intensity he brought to everything, learning how to change diapers and soothe a crying baby and walk the floor at night when James was fussy. That first winter with a new baby was exhausting, but also filled with a joy so profound, it sometimes made Olivia's chest ache. She would wake in the night to nurse James and find Nathan already awake, watching them both with soft eyes. Or she would look up from sewing to see him holding the baby against his massive chest, singing old songs in a surprisingly gentle voice. And still, every morning, Nathan managed to find her something. Not always flowers in the winter, but always some small token that said, "I see you, I love you, you are precious to me." Even exhausted from sleepless nights and overwhelmed with the demands of a new baby, he never forgot. "How do you do it?" Olivia asked one morning, watching him place a handful of dried flowers on the table. "How do you always remember, even when things are so busy and tiring?" Nathan looked at her in surprise. "Because you deserve it," he said simply. "Because every day I wake up grateful that you took a chance on a rough mountain man who did not know how to talk to pretty women. Because love is not just a feeling, it is a choice, a practice, something you do even when it is hard, especially when it is hard." Olivia set the baby down in his cradle and went to her husband, wrapping her arms around his waist and resting her head against his broad chest. "I do not know what I did to deserve you," she said. "You existed," Nathan replied, kissing the top of her head. "You survived. You were brave enough to start over. And you gave me a chance when you had every reason not to trust any man ever again. That is more than enough." As James grew from an infant to a toddler, he became a perfect blend of both his parents. He had Nathan's dark hair and eyes, but Olivia's fine-boned features and gentle temperament. He was a happy child, quick to laugh and slow to anger, and he loved the mountains as naturally as breathing. As soon as he could walk, he wanted to be outside, exploring and climbing and getting into everything. Nathan taught him about the wilderness with infinite patience, showing him how to track animals and identify plants and respect the power of nature. And Olivia taught him his letters and numbers, determined that her son would have the education she had largely been denied. At night, they would sit by the fire as a family, Nathan carving or working on some project, Olivia sewing, and James playing with wooden animals his father had made for him. Life was not always easy. There were harsh winters when food ran low and they had to be very careful with their supplies. There were illnesses and injuries, close calls with wild animals, moments of fear and hardship. But through it all, Nathan and Olivia faced everything together, their love growing deeper and stronger with each passing year. When James was 3, Olivia became pregnant again. This time she knew what to expect, and while the pregnancy was still uncomfortable, she was not afraid. Their second child, a daughter they named Sarah, arrived on a spring morning when the wildflowers were just beginning to bloom. She had Olivia's pale blue eyes and a head of copper-red hair that must have come from some distant ancestor. Nathan was, if possible, even more besotted with his daughter than he had been with his son. He carried her everywhere, this huge mountain man with a tiny infant cradled in his arms, and he sang to her constantly, silly made-up songs that made James giggle and Olivia smile. "You are going to spoil her," Olivia warned, but there was no heat in it. "That is my right as her father," Nathan replied, not at all concerned. "She will have everything I can give her. They both will." And he made good on that promise. As the children grew, Nathan and Olivia made sure they knew they were loved and wanted, that they were valued for who they were, not what they could do. There were always flowers in the cabin, always laughter, always the security of knowing they were cherished. James grew tall and strong like his father, and by the time he was 15, he could track and hunt and survive in the wilderness as well as any man. Sarah was more delicate but fiercely independent, with a sharp mind and a stubborn streak that both exasperated and delighted her parents. On the morning of their 20th anniversary, Olivia woke to find Nathan already gone from their bed. This was not unusual, but when she went outside, she found their entire cabin surrounded by flowers. Hundreds of them, every type that grew in the mountains, arranged in a massive circle around their home. Nathan stood in the middle of the display, grinning like a young man despite the gray now threading through his dark hair. 20 years of wildflowers, he said, and I am not done yet. I will bring you flowers every morning until the day I die. Olivia Thorne. She went to him, stepping carefully through the sea of blooms, and kissed him with all the love and gratitude that still overwhelmed her sometimes. "I never thought I could be this happy," she confessed. "I never thought life could be so full." "Neither did I," Nathan said, pulling her close. "I was just surviving before you, just existing day to day, but you gave me a reason to really live. You and the children, you are my everything." That night, they had a celebration with James and Sarah, now both grown with lives of their own beginning to take shape. James was courting a girl from town, a sweet-faced young woman who loved the mountains almost as much as he did. Sarah was planning to go to Denver to study, determined to become a teacher. Both children were happy and healthy and whole, raised with love and security, and the knowledge that they could become anything they wanted to be. "You did this," Nathan said to Olivia later after the children had gone to bed. "You gave them what you never had. You broke the cycle." "We did it," Olivia corrected. "Together." The years continued to pass, marked by wildflowers and love and the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived. James married his sweetheart and built a cabin not far from Nathan and Olivia's, bringing them 2 grandchildren, who Nathan spoiled even more shamelessly than he had spoiled his own children. Sarah became a teacher in Granite, returning to the mountains she loved and making a difference in the lives of countless children. And through it all, every single morning without fail, Nathan brought Olivia wildflowers. Even when arthritis began to stiffen his joints and make the long walks into the high country more difficult, he still managed to find her something. Even when winter storms raged and it would have been perfectly reasonable to stay inside, he still went out and came back with evergreen branches or interesting stones or whatever he could find. "You do not have to do this anymore," Olivia told him one morning, seeing how much the cold was bothering him. They were both in their 60s now, still healthy but showing the inevitable wear of time. "I know you love me. You do not have to prove it every day." Nathan looked at her with the same intensity he had shown that first morning in the flower meadow all those years ago. "But I want to," he said simply. "It brings me joy to give you joy, and I made a promise, did I not? Every morning until the day I die." Olivia's eyes filled with tears. "I love you so much it sometimes scares me," she confessed. "The thought of ever being without you." "Hey now," Nathan said, pulling her into his arms. "We are not anywhere near done yet. We have years ahead of us, you and I." Years of flowers and grandchildren, and sitting on the porch watching the sun set over our mountains. And they did have those years, a blessed decade more of health and happiness and love. They watched James become a father and then a grandfather himself. They saw Sarah marry a good man who appreciated her strength and intelligence. They built a legacy of love and family that spread out like roots, deep and strong and unshakable. On a morning in early June, when the wildflowers were at their absolute peak, and the mountains were so beautiful it almost hurt to look at them, Nathan woke before dawn as he always did. He dressed quietly, not wanting to wake Olivia, and headed out to gather her morning flowers. He walked slowly, his old body not as quick as it once was but still capable, still strong. He knew exactly where he wanted to go, to that high meadow where he had first told Olivia he loved her, where he had brought her every summer since. The flowers there were always the most beautiful, and today, for no reason he could name, he wanted them to be perfect. The climb took longer than it used to, and he had to stop and rest several times. But finally, he crested the ridge and looked down at the meadow, and his breath caught just as it had that first time, all those years ago. It was a sea of color, purple and red and yellow and white, absolutely glorious in the early morning light. He spent a long time selecting the perfect flowers, taking his time to create a bouquet worthy of his wife. And when he was satisfied, he started the walk back down, his heart full of contentment and love and gratitude for the life they had built together. He was halfway home when the pain hit, sudden and overwhelming, radiating from his chest down his left arm. Nathan staggered, trying to stay upright, but his legs would not hold him. He went down hard, the flowers scattering around him. His last thought, as the world began to fade, was not of fear or regret. It was of Olivia, standing at her window on that first morning, looking like she was made of moonlight and hope. And he hoped with everything he had left that she knew, that she understood how much she had meant to him, how she had transformed his life from mere existence into something beautiful and precious and worth every moment. Olivia woke that morning to sunlight streaming through the window and no flowers on the table. At first she thought Nathan must have overslept, something he almost never did. But when she looked over at his side of the bed, she saw it was empty, the blankets cold. A chill of premonition ran down her spine. "Nathan," she called, knowing somehow there would be no answer. She dressed quickly and went outside, and the emptiness she felt confirmed what she already feared. James found his father later that morning, lying in a clearing halfway between the house and the high meadows, surrounded by scattered wildflowers. He had died doing what he loved in the mountains he called home, gathering flowers for the woman he had loved for 43 years. The grief was crushing, overwhelming, a pain so deep Olivia thought it might actually kill her. For days, she could barely function, could barely breathe. But slowly, with the help of her children and grandchildren, she began to find her way through it. And she held on to the knowledge that Nathan had loved her, completely and without reservation, every single day of their life together. At the funeral, the entire town turned out and beyond. People came from all over to pay their respects to the mountain man who had been known for his kindness and his devotion to his wife. They buried him in a clearing near the cabin, with a view of the mountains he had loved, and Olivia planted wildflowers all around the grave. The first morning after the funeral, Olivia woke alone in the bed she had shared with Nathan for more than 4 decades. The silence was crushing, the emptiness absolute. She dragged herself to the window, looking out at the mountains that suddenly seemed cold and alien without him. And then she saw them. On the porch, arranged in a careful circle around the door, were flowers. Hundreds of them, every type that grew in the area, clearly picked and placed with loving care. Olivia went outside on shaking legs. James was standing nearby, his eyes red from crying. "I remembered what Pa told me once," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "He said if anything ever happened to him, I should make sure you still got your flowers. So Sarah and we went out before dawn and gathered these. We will do it every morning, Ma. Every single morning, for as long as you want them. It is what Pa would have wanted. Olivia looked at the flowers, at her children who stood waiting to see if they had done the right thing, and felt something break open in her chest. Not the sharp crack of fresh grief, but a softer fracture, a place where light could get in. Nathan was gone, but the love he had built, the family he had created, the legacy he had left, all of that remained. She gathered the flowers carefully, holding them like the precious gift they were. "Thank you," she said to her children. "Your father would be so proud of you both." And so the tradition continued. James and his sons would take turns, and when Sarah's children were old enough, they joined in too. Every morning, Olivia would wake to find wildflowers waiting for her, a reminder that love did not end with death, that the bonds forged in life could stretch beyond the grave. She lived for another 15 years, remaining in the cabin she had shared with Nathan, surrounded by his memory and the wild beauty of the mountains. She watched her grandchildren have children of their own, saw the family tree expand and flourish. And every morning, without fail, there were flowers. On the evening before she died, a peaceful passing in her sleep at the age of 82, Olivia sat on the porch watching the sunset. James sat with her, his hair now mostly gray, his face lined with the years. "I have been so blessed," Olivia said softly. "I never thought I would have any of this. A family, a home, a love that lasted a lifetime and beyond. Your father gave me that. He saw me when I thought I was invisible, and he loved me when I thought I was unlovable." "He knew what he had," James said, taking her hand. "And he made sure everyone else knew it too." That night, Olivia went to bed surrounded by vases of wildflowers, the scent of them filling the room. She dreamed of a meadow high in the mountains, ablaze with color, and of Nathan waiting there, his arms open, his smile bright. "Took you long enough," he said in the dream, pulling her close. "I had flowers to enjoy," she replied, and he laughed, the sound echoing across the meadow like music. They buried her next to Nathan, in the clearing with the mountain view, and covered both graves with so many wildflowers that it looked like the meadow had come down from the high country to embrace them. The entire town came, and beyond, people traveling from far and wide to pay their respects to the woman who had been loved so well, and who had loved so completely in return. Years later, people in Granite still told the story of Nathan Thorne and Olivia Anders, the mountain man and the seamstress who had found each other in a small Montana town. They spoke of the wildflowers that appeared every morning without fail, of a love so deep and true it became legend. Young women would hope for a love like that, and young men would aspire to be the kind of partner Nathan had been. And in the high meadows above Granite, where the wildflowers still bloomed in glorious abundance every summer, people sometimes reported seeing them. A tall man with long, dark hair walking beside a slender woman with eyes the color of mountain forget-me-nots. They would be holding hands, surrounded by flowers, and they would look completely at peace. The story of their love had ended, but it had not ended sadly. It had ended the way all great love stories should end, with a life fully lived, a family deeply loved, and the knowledge that what they had built together would continue long after they were gone, rippling out through generations like flowers spreading across a meadow, beautiful and wild and absolutely unstoppable. Their great-great-grandchildren still lived in those mountains, still told the story of Nathan and his wildflowers, of Olivia and her window. And sometimes, on summer mornings when the light was just right, they would find unexpected bouquets of wildflowers in strange places, as if the mountains themselves remembered and wanted to keep the tradition alive. Because true love, the kind that sees and values and cherishes, the kind that shows up every single day with proof of devotion. That kind of love never really dies. It transforms, becomes part of the land and the air and the stories people tell. It becomes the standard by which all other love is measured. And that, perhaps, was the greatest gift Nathan Thorne had ever given his wife. Not the flowers themselves, though those were precious, but the proof, demonstrated every single morning for 43 years, that love was not just words or grand gestures. It was consistency. It was showing up. It was seeing someone who felt invisible and making sure they knew, beyond any doubt, that they were seen, they were known, they were valued beyond measure. Olivia had never received a gift before Nathan. But in the end, she had received the greatest gift of all, a lifetime of being loved exactly as she deserved, fully and completely, by a man who never forgot to show her, who never took her for granted, who never let a single day pass without reminding her that she was precious. And really, what more could anyone ask for than that?